3 series I'm doing on managing your emotions for a healthier life. So this is about dealing with our feelings. And today I want to go a little deeper into why we're even talking about feelings. How is the human brain wired? What's the point of really focusing on these feelings? And all the research that we've been doing just in the last couple of decade and a half, last 2 decades at tops, where we've learned a lot more about how human beings operate, and particularly how we make decisions, that it's important for us to be aware of. I think especially as Christians in the world today. Why do we do what we do? Why do we believe what we believe? Why do we choose what we choose? So this is what I want to talk about today. And as always, feel free to jump in if you have questions, if you have comments, stories I can use in my next book. I'm always open to those. So feel free to jump in and give me any input you want to give me. I never make it through my notes at BPC, and that's a good thing. I think it's good because we get into important things that I think we all want to relate to. So we're afraid of our emotions in general. Many people still today don't want to talk about their feelings because they're afraid of what they might do if they do talk about it. A lot of people think if I just don't say how I feel, then my feelings won't run away and control me. That's actually not true. Your feelings can run away and control you even if you don't say how you feel. So it's important for us to be able to identify them. I'm reminded of the time back when Winston Churchill was popular, and he was expounding on his politics in Parliament, and Lady Astor, the first woman member of Parliament, was very, very frustrated with him, and she became more and more furious as he kept talking, and the emotions got the better of her, and she said to him, "Winston, if you were my husband, I'd put poison in your coffee." And he said to her, "Lady Astor, if I were your husband, I would drink it." So we're afraid that our feelings will get away, make us get away from ourselves and say things that we regret. And so we're trying to keep our feelings tamped down as if that's a better strategy. And you'll find out today that isn't. But our feelings do make us say things. Jesus said, remember, a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. This is the point I'm trying to make today, that you've got an emotional part of your brain is quite real. The emotional part of the brain doesn't forget. The thinking part of the brain forgets easily. A year from now, you will not remember what I said content-wise, but you'll know how you felt. You'll know, gee, that was good. I like that guy. Or you remember, nah, that guy, he just went on and on and on. Stories that didn't make any sense. You'll remember how you felt much more clearly than you'll remember the actual content. It is harder for us to remember content than it is for us to remember emotions. That's an important fact, because what do you think is going to be driving your decisions? The part you remember, right? That's what I want us to focus on. And I really think that Jesus had a handle on this. Dallas Willard said that Jesus was the most intelligent man who ever lived. And I like that conceptualization, because he was constantly saying things that were unbelievably profound. Why are we still talking about him 2,000 years later? He was saying things that were just life-changing. And more people in the world today follow the teachings of Jesus than any other person. So I think there's profound bits of wisdom in his insight that I like to keep going back to. He said, to be great, we must be small. To be a leader, we must serve. To be a profound thinker, we must be able to feel. I think it's embedded in his teaching. I'm going to go back to the statement about kids. The disciples came to Jesus and they said, so who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Profound, profound teaching. How does that make any sense? To be great, you've got to be humble. To be the most powerful person in the room, you've got to be like a child. How does that make sense? I think he had profound insight into the nature of how humans operate. And I think one of the things, he was saying many things in this statement, but one of the things he was saying is we need to have a childlike attitude in certain circumstances. Now, that's not childish. There's a difference between childish and childlike. And that's an important distinction to make. I'm not saying that every time you have a feeling, you should say it. And I'm not saying that every time you have a feeling, you should choose to act on that feeling. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to be emotionally intelligent, and that's what we're going to try to sort out today. What's the difference between childish and childlike? To be childish is to be impulsive. It's to have a feeling and then impulsively act on it. And childishness and impulsiveness is motivated by fear. There's some fear there that causes you to act in a way that's impulsive and not thought through, and often doesn't result in good choices. Childlike is to be spontaneous, and spontaneity is motivated by love. If I have an experience coming up today, the Super Bowl's happening today, we will stop on time, I promise you. I want to watch the Super Bowl because I love football, right? So I become kind of childlike in that moment because I love it. I want to do it. I want to have more of that experience. That's different from being impulsive. I'm afraid, I feel insecure, and so I'll impulsively do something that makes me actually unattractive to other people. So it's important to know those two distinctions, because we're going to try to nuance the use of our emotions in our relationships today. They're critical, they're important, but we also have to nuance the expression of our emotions to make us effective people in the world today. So denying your emotions and trying to repress them, not a good thing, but simply saying how you feel all the time to everyone is also not a good thing. As Brene Brown has become famous for, choose your confidence wisely. There are people who can negotiate life with you. If you're vulnerable with them, with your feelings, they can be vulnerable with you. That's a safe person for you to express your feelings to. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone can do the emotional work or do emotional business in life. So we have to be wise about the expression of our feelings. Jesus, I believe, had mature boundaries, and he made people feel connected to him because he was able to be vulnerable. We have story after story after story with him talking to people, and they felt connected to him. The woman at the well goes back home and says, you know, he told me everything I ever did. No, he didn't. He said like 3 things to you. And yet her experience was, the man completely knows me. I feel profoundly understood by this guy. And so people felt close and they felt safe. So you have to have both those two things to be an effective emotional communicator. People have to feel close to you, which means you're able to be vulnerable, but they also have to feel safe, meaning this guy is going to take responsibility for his emotions and have good boundaries and be a safe person for me to also share my feelings with, not just someone who's emotional. Just being emotional isn't good enough. It's what we do with them that helps us determine whether or not we're going to be an effective person in life, effective communicator. So we're going to look at all of that hopefully today, if we get there. It was popular, we talked about this last week or 2 weeks ago. It was popular to think if you just share your feelings, that's emotional health. Just get in a room with other people and let it all hang out. Beat each other with batakas, say whatever you need to say. And if somebody else can't handle it, that's your problem, right? I'm not responsible for your emotions. I'm only responsible for the expression of my own. Remember that ideology? Bad psychology. It's not true. We now know that we can make each other feel things. We know that we're hardwired to respond to the emotions of other people. You might not be responsible for someone else's feelings, but you're responsible to them. Because of how humans are hardwired to respond emotionally in situations, you have a moral responsibility for knowing that. I can make you feel things. We now know that. We actually know that we're set up neurologically for us to mirror certain emotions in other people. It's automatic. And tell you what's even more powerful is that we've done studies where we've taken children, sometimes very small children, and shown them videos of people sharing emotions like anger and anxiety and fear, and it stimulates those areas of the brains of those kids. So what I'm saying is, a movie can make you feel something, not even a real person. That's how we are wired. I'm wired to be sensitive, to pick up on the feelings of other people, and if they're feeling something, I'm hardwired to feel that. So what I'm saying is, know that about your relationships. When you enter into a relationship, you're entering into holy ground. You can make other people feel things, and you have a responsibility to know that human beings are hardwired that way. We communicate meaning and emotion automatically. And so it is not true to say, I'm not responsible for your feelings. So don't say that anymore. Say, you're responsible for your feelings, I'm not. That's not quite true. That's not quite true, especially in close, intimate relationships. You can hurt someone by not saying anything. If someone expresses their feelings and you just go quiet on them, that can be very hurtful. That's actually sending a message. Sometimes not speaking sends a louder message than speaking. So you can affect the emotions of the people next to you by simply being in the room with them. Is the point that I make. So you've heard me say this before, but I want to emphasize that again.
So question is that why theater works?
Often, yes.
You sit there, you're watching something, you know it's just theater, but it makes you feel all the things they want you to feel.
If they're good at it, they do. That's right.
And because of that, you say you really liked it or didn't like it, or admire it. And I hadn't thought of that before.
I had an actress who'd done a lot of movies say to me once, "Oh, you and I do the same thing. We create emotion in other people." That she knew that was her agenda. I am there to be in a certain way to evoke emotion in other people, and effective actors know how to do that. They know how to. It's not actually true that they're creating emotion, but they are acting in such a way as to trigger and stimulate emotions in others. And psychologists don't really do the same thing, but I know it was a bonding thing for her to say that. So, but I got what she was saying. Yes, actors do that.
And generally, it's something that we like. I'll say, oh, I went and saw the show, or I love, like, why do we love the movies we love?
Right.
Because they evoke certain emotions in us. I laughed, I cried, it had everything, or something like that. But we know we are emotionally drawn to certain movies, certain books, certain music. I mean, it's like that in worship too. We have our favorite worship songs or our favorite scriptures that will evoke emotions in us. And then because of that emotional connection or that emotional reaction, we are drawn back to them again and again.
Correct. And it's transcendent. And I'll even take this up a notch. About 15 to 20% of the population are what we call highly sensitive people. We've actually studied this. HSPs are the name for it. If you're a highly sensitive person, then you have emotion and emotional reaction that's even greater than other people around you. So that means there are certain movies, certain theater events that are too much for you. My wife, definitely an HSP. So if I want to watch, an action movie, she doesn't want to see it. It's like that. I'm gonna feel too much, is what she'll say. I like Liam Neeson. A good Liam Neeson movie, it's relaxing for me. She literally sometimes will have to leave the room. It's like, no, you know what? I'm not gonna be able to sleep tonight if I watch this. His daughter got kidnapped, and I've got a daughter, and I cannot watch a movie about daughters being kidnapped. And I'm thinking, he saves her in the end. Wait a minute, this is a good thing. The dad is the good guy. I want to see that, but I'm not an HSP. She calls me a highly insensitive person, but she's a highly sensitive person. So it's a real thing, is what I'm saying. Certain of you might be an HSP, which this explains why there's certain movies you don't want to see. There's certain events you don't want to go to, that you don't want to watch the news. You don't want to see that video again, right? It's too disturbing to you. It makes you feel so much. That's not a bad thing, but it's a thing. And you need to know that if you're one of those people that like an empath, you just feel what other people feel. And even though you know it's a movie and you're telling yourself, I know it's a movie, you still can't get it out of your head later. You're still laying awake at night thinking, oh, that poor girl, she got kidnapped and that was so terrible.
Mark,
yes.
I have but is there a difference? Like for me, if I watch a movie that's emotional, I get emotional, I can feel the pain.
Yeah.
But I think there's a difference between watching a movie that evokes emotion versus a relationship with someone you trust or a good friend who's telling you something hurtful.
Yes.
Then I have to then make a decision. Do I choose to believe this hurtful idea of me and make it my identity, become like oh my gosh, I'm this horrible person. It's not like I did something bad, but now I am this bad person.
Right.
So that instead of just feeling the pain, I now am adding suffering to the pain. And then that pain lingers longer, and
Yes.
it becomes possibly, so I have a choice. I have to always think, wait a minute, this is just, she's saying this. It's not really, is it really, really true? Or is it just her reaction to whatever? And then I can think more clearly about it and talk to her once I figure it out.
Yes, it's very, very complex. And you're making the distinction between guilt and shame, which is an important distinction to make. So if someone criticizes you and they say, I can't believe you did this or that. If you, in fact, did something that hurt the person, you will feel guilt. Guilt is, I feel bad about what I did. Shame is, I feel bad about who I am. That's not helpful. You feel like, oh my gosh, I'm now a bad person. You think I'm a bad person. I think I'm a bad person. That is not helpful. It's a toxic emotion that leads to all kinds of difficulties in our life. It's important to make the distinction, because if I've hurt someone and they tell me I've hurt them, I feel guilty for having hurt them. A good person doesn't feel bad about themselves for that. They're like, oh, I made a mistake. Oh, I'm so sorry I said that. If that hurt you, that's not what I meant. And guilt motivates us to repair the relationship. Shame motivates us to feel bad about ourselves and hide, and nothing good comes out of it. But I'll come back and talk about that. That's another book I wrote on overcoming shame. And the distinction between the two is really important, because even when someone's confronting you, to hang on to a good sense of yourself. I'm a good person, but sometimes good people also hurt people. So occasionally I feel guilty for having done something. That doesn't make me a bad person. Important distinction. All right, let's talk about Daniel Goleman, emotional intelligence. I touched on that last week. He was the seminal Harvard researcher. And you remember why he wrote this book? It's back in 1995. Harvard, most famous school in America. All the smart people go there. If any of you are from Harvard, I would probably know it because it usually comes up in the conversation. And they did research to determine what their graduates did in life. And what they found is that the guys, primarily they were doing research on men back in 1995, but the guys that got the best test scores at Harvard didn't do the best in their professional lives. So they studied them in the 30s, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. It's like, what's up with that? So the smartest guys at Harvard didn't turn out to be the most successful guys. That's blowing our mind. What is going on with that? Well, Daniel Goleman looked into this and he found out, you can't just have intellectual intelligence to be successful. You also have to emotional intelligence. And now we all hear about EQ today. If you're going to be a successful person, you've got to have EQ, not just IQ. IQ is not good enough. If you have just IQ and no EQ, we call you autistic or Asperger's or something like that. It's not good enough for you just to have IQ and be successful, totally successful in life. Of course, there are exceptions. I know that, but in general. So he wrote his book, Emotional Intelligence, based on that. Now, interestingly enough, 15 years later, he looked at that research. And he said, you know what? That's not good enough either. Just having EQ isn't good enough. What matters is what you do with your EQ. You can be very intelligent, also have emotional intelligence, but you're not using that intelligence in a productive way in society. It doesn't help you connect with other people. So you're able to read everybody else's emotions in the room, but you don't care. That doesn't make you a successful person. And now his book he wrote in 2006 is called Social Intelligence. So what's the point? He's saying you have to be a successful person in life, you have to be intellectually intelligent, reasoning intelligent, emotionally intelligent, know your feelings, have empathy for the feelings of others, and use that to connect you in social relationships. If there's no social good that comes out of it, then you're wasting your life. Now he's starting to sound a lot like Jesus now, right? Our relationships with God and others is what matters. That's what matters. So you need to use your intelligence, both IQ and EQ, to what? To be a productive person with other human beings. So now Daniel Goleman is on this bandwagon. Knowing how you feel is not enough. We must use those feelings for social good. This is now the new trend. Well, so how do we do that? So I'm going to go back to Daniel Kahneman. He's the psychologist who got the Nobel Peace Prize in economics. It still blows me away. A psychologist who got a Nobel Peace Prize in economics, right? Because he could understand human beings and why they made the decisions they made. So he built predictive models. I can predict what people are going to choose in this scenario and that scenario. Brilliant. And the book Thinking Fast and Slow is easy to read. You should get it. You should read it. And in that book, he clarifies, and lots of people say this, he's not the only one, that there are two tracks, two ways in which we think. We think fast and we think slow. So we've got the intuitive part of our brain where we make quick decisions very, very fast. And then we've got the slow, more methodological, the thinking, the analytical part of the brain that takes longer. And, which all psychologists say this, we prefer the intuitive because it's fast. You know, we can make snap judgments quickly. It's important to understand that you have both of these capacities in your brain. I'm going to get you why. So I'll give you a little problem on illustrating this. Very simple math problem. I know you didn't want to come to church to do math, but this is really easy math problem. You deal with this every day. This illustrates the thinking fast and slow part of the brain. Here's the problem. A tennis racket and tennis ball together cost $1.10. The racket costs $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? You all know. You got the answer, right? Sounds like 10 cents, right? Most people would say 10 cents. It's not. I said the racket costs $1 more than the ball, right? So think it through. Well, that means the ball's got to be 5 cents. If the racket costs $1 more than the ball, the racket's got to be $1.05 and the ball's got to be 5, and that gets us to $1.10, right? So the reason you all, most of you, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, thought, well, it's 10 cents, is because it's a common, intuitive, everyday problem that feels familiar to you. So you think you know the answer. I didn't say the racket costs $1. I said the racket costs $1 more than the ball. So you'd have to stop and think about that. Wait a minute, the racket costs $1 more, so the math would be $1.05 plus 5 gets us to $1.10. That's too hard. That illustrates, it's Kahneman's illustration for what we do every day. You're faced with everyday problems that are a little bit nuanced, but you hear the simple way of doing the problem and you make a snap judgment. We all prefer that. We prefer to believe that life is simple and that my intuitive sense is right. Now, you may remember Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink. The whole book was about how your intuitive snap judgments are usually probably right. So it's what we do, it's what we prefer. And Gladwell, who was not a scientist, he's just a reporter who put together a bunch of material and gave a lot of good examples for people making snap judgments and having it be right. What Kahneman is saying, you're not always right. Yes, you prefer to use your intuition. You prefer to believe that life is simple and that your snap judgments are accurate. But as it turns out, as you just saw, that's not true. Now, sometimes it is true. And that was Gladwell's point. But he's been very criticized a lot for playing fast and loose with science in his books, because he's a reporter, he's a writer. And it makes an interesting story that intuitive side of your brain that you like to lean on is sometimes right, and that's true, but it's not always right.
Mark, there's a DC expression. I lived in Washington, DC for 15 years. It is, for every complicated problem, there is inevitably a simple solution. And it is inevitably wrong. Now, I don't always agree with that, but it's interesting.
I think that's wise counsel to make you think it through. The point that, which I think is right in your statement, is that we like to make snap judgments. We like to think, well, there's a simple solution. Sometimes that's true, but it's not always true. It's not always true. Now, what I want to keep emphasizing here is we like that. We like to believe our intuition is right. All of us like to believe that. And yet there are important situations in which it isn't. But we like to lean on that. Ivan, was it you? Who was it last week that mentioned The Originals by Adam Grant?
Not me. Mine was potato chips.
So,
That was me.
Jim, okay. I bought the book. It was a great book. And in the book, he makes a great example. He talks about Steve Jobs. Now, Steve Jobs, obviously one of the most brilliant and successful guys that we know of, right, in our lifetime. Well, Steve Jobs was presented with a business opportunity after he was successful and he made millions and millions of dollars. And a guy came to him who had invented the Segway. Some of you know what the Segway is. I kind of did and then didn't, you know. And Steve Jobs intuitively knew this is going to change society. He intuitively knew this is as important as the personal computer. And so he invested millions in the Segway. Well, most of you don't even know what the Segway is. You know, it's that thing that you stand on, and it's an individual people mover that moves around. You see people every now.
Yeah, you can buy Groupons for Segway tours around cities. It's a popular tourist thing to do.
Yes.
Segway tour.
Yes. But you do not all own a Segway. Steve Jobs was wrong. His intuition was, this is going to change our lives as much as the personal computer changed our lives. He said that, and he got people to invest in this Segway. So what's the problem with his intuition? And this is what Adam Grant says in his book Originals. Intuition is really only effective when you have experience in an area. So what's my point? Steve Jobs had no experience in transportation. He was way out of his area, but he thought because of his previous success in other areas that his intuition was always going to be right. So he thought, well, I've been so right before. I've been hugely successful before. I must be always right because I'm a millionaire and I did change culture and society. So my intuition's got to always be right. It isn't. It is most often right in areas where you have previous experience. So let me say that. You're going to get intuition. You're going to get a sense that you kind of know where this is going, and this is going to change life as much as the personal computer. Well, ask yourself, do you have a lot of experience in that area? Because what Adam Grant says, the two things that are the death knell to intuition is hubris and lack of personal experience. So be humble with your snap judgments and your intuitions, and also ask yourself whether or not you know anything about that area of which you decided to opine and make decisions. All right, so what's the point of all this? Why are we talking about this? Because most importantly, we make moral judgments primarily with intuition. All right, now this is the sobering truth of today. We make our moral judgments primarily with intuition. I said this last week and it really upset a lot of people, that you make your moral judgments intuitively and then you come up with the reasons later to justify your moral intuition, your intuition about moral choices. So here's Jonathan Hyde, who wrote The Righteous Mind. Brilliant psychologist. I really think you should read Hyde. He wrote the Happiness Hypothesis, The Righteous Mind, a couple other books. The first principle of moral psychology is that moral intuitions come first and strategic moral reasoning comes second. I know that's tough. I remember when the professor first said that to me in graduate school, it was very upsetting. He said, you think you're rational? You're not. You're rationalizing. Man is not a rational animal. He said, this was back when we could say this. Men and women are not rational animals. They are rationalizing animals. And what he was saying is you make your moral judgments based on intuition, and then you come up with your reasoning afterwards. Now that is sobering. It's sobering for us. We should all be humble. We should take a step back. The stuff you're absolutely certain you believe, you more than likely came to those conclusions first with your intuition, and then you started reading the news you wanted to read, reading the books you wanted to read. We now know more so than ever in history, people are watching their own news sources. They're not watching each other's news sources. You know, you're just listening to people that reinforce your ideas. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing as a culture. That to me is very sobering. And Jonathan Haidt, if you remember, his metaphor for how the human mind works is a rider on an elephant. The rider is your ability to reason, and the elephant is your emotional life. And if the elephant wants to storm off in some direction, what do you think that little rider can do to control it? Not much. So if your emotions go in a particular direction, the rider is going to do the best the rider can to control and direct the emotions, but the emotions are going to win out whenever there's a big, big conflict. Whenever there's a big, big conflict. Plato said that reason ought to be the master. Hume said that reason ought to be the servant of our passions. And Jefferson believed that reason and sentiment ought to be independent co-rulers of us. We're figuring that out now, that we need to understand our passions, our sentiments, our intuitions, as well as our ability to rationally think straight. You've got to realize the human brain is wired to do both. And we like to make intuitive judgments, particularly in the area of morality. You can see where I'm headed. This creates conflicts, creates really, really big conflicts, because you're absolutely certain of what you know, and then you go out and find reasons to support what you're absolutely certain of. Are you familiar with the book Descartes' Error by Antonio Damasio? He's a neuropsychologist who you get from the title, where he's questioning Descartes' dictum, I think, therefore I am, the primacy of reason. Well, Damasio was studying patients who'd had the emotional center of their brain damaged by accident. They didn't do it on purpose. They had car accidents and other things where the people he was studying in his study came to his office unable to have emotions because the emotional centers of the brain were damaged. Now, what's interesting is that these people had normal IQ, and they gave them IQ tests. They also gave them tests of moral judgment, and they seemed morally, to be normal. So they're normal IQ, normally moral. They weren't out doing immoral things. But when you gave them tasks to solve, they couldn't make good choices. They would make foolish choices. They would make choices that were not good for them or good for other people. They either couldn't make a choice. They'd say, well, I don't know. I don't know what to do. Or the choices they make would be foolish. So what's Damasio's conclusion? You need emotionality, the emotional part of the brain, to interact and work with the thinking part of the brain to make good choices. You have to put them both together to make good choices. You can't just believe that your conclusions, particularly in the area of morality, are based solely on reason, because that's not how the brain works. We need an interaction. How do I feel about that? Well, then what do I think about how I feel? And what's the meaning to me of that feeling? You have to interact both with our reasoning and our emotionality in order to make good choices. Sobering, isn't it? What am I saying? You can't change someone's mind simply by refuting their arguments. It won't work. You've tried it, haven't you? You've tried. Look, you don't understand the irrationality of your position. Let me explain to you why the position you're taking doesn't make sense. How often has that worked? Almost never. Because you can't argue someone out of their emotionality and out of their intuition. So that is extremely humbling. Think about the differences that we have, that you have with your friends, differences we have in our country right now. Why is it you have very, very intelligent people on both sides of an argument, and you hear them arguing and you think, are you guys even listening to each other? I can't believe what you're saying. Because we are very, very committed to our intuitive moral decisions, and then we come up with our arguments later. And if something refutes my argument, well, I'll just get more argument. I'll go read somebody else. I'll go find someone else who believes what I believe and come up with a better argument. What are your talking points? Because mine weren't working over here with this guy. So you go look for better talking points. To do what? To support what you already believe is true. And we all do it. We all do it. You do it. I do it. We all do it. It's what we're hardwired to do. My point is that we should have great humility. So if you can't argue someone out of their position, I'm talking particularly about decisions that are moral decisions, deeply believed moral values that separate us, right? What can you do? How do you talk to someone? Well, most of us just avoid them. At Thanksgiving, you just don't talk about politics because it's not going anywhere. You have certain friends, you have to choose whether or not you can be around them at all because they're going to say something that really makes you mad. And so you just avoid the conversation, right? That's what most of us do anyway. We have people now, just to this last Thanksgiving, maybe it's on the rise or maybe it's always been this way, who say, I just can't talk to my family about politics. I just can't talk to them anymore. Why? Because you can't argue someone out of a moral decision that's made intuitively. So what can you do? What's the antidote to what Jonathan Hyde calls righteousness? This is what he calls righteousness, that we believe we're right and we've come to that decision morally and intuitively. What can we do? Empathy. Empathy is the antidote to righteousness. What we can do is say, well, tell me more about that. I would like to understand how you got there. Really? I'm interested in that. Really, you really believe that? Tell me why you believe that, because I'm really interested in understanding that. What can possibly open someone up to wanting to listen to your perspective, wanting to be interested in what you believe, which they believe is really wrong, is you being interested in what they believe. It loosens them up a little bit. Really? You really want to know? You're really interested in how I feel? You really want to understand my perspective? But then at the end of that, they're much more likely to listen to what you might have to say. That empathy is what we call the antidote to righteousness. For you genuinely being interested in the feelings and thoughts of the other person, genuinely being interested in how they got to where they are, is the only pathway we know of to loosen them up so that they might be interested in something different and seeing something from a different perspective. Now think about all the exchanges you saw about Jesus in the Bible, every example. He's listening to people, he's having a conversation. Well, tell me more about yourself. What do you have to say about this? And people would ask him a question, what would he do? He'd tell them a story. He could give them the answer. He doesn't do that. He said, well, let me tell you a story. And then he'd just talk, give a story. He didn't have that self-righteous kind of, well, this is what you need to believe. He was constantly interacting with people with social intelligence. Change the planet with that way of being. It's not what we are. When people ask us, we tell them. They ask us a direct question, we give them a direct answer, and we think that's going to work. It doesn't work that way. Can't change people's minds by refuting their arguments. Jesus said we live by faith, not by sight. For a man's heart determines his speech.
There's a book I read called Conversational Capacity. And the essence of the thought is that conversational capacity is when you balance candor with curiosity. And curiosity, I guess, would be empathy. You're genuinely curious about what another person has to say or how they feel or what they think. And you are also able to be candid about your own thoughts and feelings. And the funny thing is that in this book, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, says you don't necessarily have to like each other in order to have good conversational capacity. In fact, being friends and being close may inhibit conversational capacity, because you do not want to hurt their feelings. And so therefore you're not as candid.
Right.
And it diminishes your conversational capacity.
Right. The best position, the best compliment you could give someone is where you genuinely end up saying, I see why you believe that way. That makes perfect sense that you believe what you believe. I don't happen to believe that, but I can see why you do, and that makes perfect sense. I'm really now thinking about what you've said, because that is, I can see why an intelligent person would believe what you believe. I don't happen to believe that, but I can see that that's a good way to be. That's a compliment, where I don't have to agree with you. We don't have to be exactly alike, but I respect your intelligence. We've lost that in our social discourse today. If you disagree with me, you're bad, you're evil, or you're an idiot.
Well, but also when you're genuinely curious, you're actually making yourself vulnerable. You're actually saying, I am open
Yep.
to changing where I am.
Right.
I'm just discovering. I'm on a journey of discovery with you, and so whatever you bring to the table will affect me and will change me, and I'm okay with that.
It takes a lot of moral courage to take that stance. If you're really hearing what I'm saying today, then what you've got to be able to say to yourself is, I've come to most of my moral decisions intuitively, and like with the tennis racket and the tennis ball, I could be wrong. So I'm going to be mature and confident enough to be open to the fact that I could be wrong. So I'm going to be curious. So tell me more about your perspective. Why did you vote for that guy? Really? I want to hear. I really want to hear, because I could be wrong. That is very, very difficult for us to do, because we come to these moral decisions intuitively and we really believe it's right. And then we've got all this data that we've researched to support why we believe this is right. So it takes a lot of maturity to take a step back. Yes.
Mark, can you give some examples of that, of moral decisions? What do you mean by moral, or what are some moral decisions we make that we make intuitively, and then but believe that we're making rationally?
Hope I'm going to get there. Go far ahead. I have to skip.
Sorry, am I making you jump ahead in your notes?
All right. It's a good question. What do we mean by moral? What do we mean by moral, right? Well, Jonathan Hyde and others have been studying this for years. Let me say this, and then I'll go back to where I was. What do we mean when we say moral judgments? It's not just do no harm. That's too simplistic. Now, we would like to think that anything is moral if it doesn't hurt you. If I don't hurt somebody else, then it's okay. But actually, morality, the definition of moral decisions, varies by culture. If you go to different parts of the world, then they're going to emphasize something different than what we emphasize. So, because people have studied this, Hyde says it's kind of like having taste buds. There are probably 6 different areas of morality that matter to some people more than others. So let me see if I can find it. Hang on. What are the 6 areas of morality? You probably you would like to know that, wouldn't you?
Mark, isn't morality like if I believe in abortion or no, if I believe that Christianity or not, if I believe in gays or marriage or not? Aren't those moral, kind of intuitive or cultural, religious stance?
Yes. So yes, but if you look across cultures, you can divide it into 6 categories. Here's the categories. Do you care about people or hurt them? And that's the first one. And do no harm. But some people emphasize fairness. Is it fair or not? Others would emphasize loyalty. That's moral to remain loyal. Certain cultures are very, very emphasizing loyalty. Respect for authority. What he calls sanctity, or believing that certain things are disgusting, certain things are not disgusting. And liberty oppression. So if you emphasize some of those areas, you consider yourself to be a moral person, another person not. Let's say you emphasize loyalty, authority, sanctity, liberty, but not so much do no harm. You say, well, do no harm, that's important, but so is loyalty, so is authority, sanctity, liberty. So it depends on the culture and the person as to which you emphasize, right? And Hyde says this, so for liberals in America today, the emphasis is on care and not harming. That is a big, big emphasis. Do you hurt someone else, or are you caring for someone else? That's my major sense of moral decision. Whereas then other people in the society would emphasize these other things: sanctity, liberty, loyalty, authority, fairness. Those are also very, very, very important to me. And I don't want to do harm, but I also can't violate these areas as well. So you see, then we make these decisions based on our culture, our experience, the things that we consider to be most important to us to make moral decisions.
Well,
And-
isn't
Go ahead.
a blame judgment is a moral decision, right?
Yes,
And so, you know, I would guess what the most obvious one is a lynch mob. A group of people decide that someone deserves punishment based on what? Right? Somebody rattles them up and says, you know, an evil was done and that's the person who did it, and people agree without knowing any facts.
yes,
And proceed directly to punishment because of their moral righteous indignation.
correct. And that's a good example. Literal lynching, right? That clearly it violates the principle of do no harm, right? But why would you do that? Because for us, the violation of authority, sanctity, liberty, these other things are more important to us than do no harm. And so I feel morally righteous in actually hanging someone, killing someone, because they have violated these other areas of morality that I think are just as important. So you see how complex it gets.
But Mark, I heard yesterday in the news about Pakistan, about the getting vaccinations for COVID and no, polio, sorry. And everybody was getting their vaccines. All of a sudden, this one person went in the news and said you could die from it. It's a Western, poison thing, and all on lies. And next thing you know, the news media got on it, and then other people started believing just on a lie. And suddenly you have all these hundreds and hundreds of people getting polio based on this. So it can create this chaotic thing by just one person or one side, whatever, you know.
Yes. And as is typical, Alice is leading me to my next point. She often makes a statement that's just right where I was going. Yes, so let's ask ourselves a very important question, a very important caveat. What if someone is emotionally intelligent, but they're using this awareness of the feelings of others, using their empathy in an evil way? That now it really gets scary, right? This is Daniel Goleman's shift in his research. EQ is not enough. We have to use EQ for social good. Why? Because originally we thought that people who do harm are narcissistic people and they lack empathy, but that's not quite right. You can be a very narcissistic person who does read the emotions of other people and uses that for harm, uses it for your own good, uses it for whatever selfish reason the person would have for saying, don't take the polio vaccine. We don't know. We'd have to get inside that person's head. But it ended creating up a lot of fear in a lot of people that caused them to go off in a direction that was not good for them, right? So I think it's important for us to realize that empathy, or awareness of emotions and awareness of the emotions of other people, is a very, very powerful tool. But that in and of itself doesn't determine whether or not you're using it for good. There are people who can read the emotions of others, read them well, can inspire others to follow them, and yet they have nefarious motives in doing what they're doing. So this again is very important for us to ask ourselves, what do we feel, and what is the good we're doing with it. There's a difference between a psychopath and a sociopath, and we take these terms out of the DSM, but the people who study these things still make these distinctions. A psychopath is someone who can't have a relationship with other people. These are the really, really scary people in life. They kill without any guilt at all, without any remorse at all. A sociopath is someone who also is manipulative, and will kill, but they can form social relationships. So you have people that, like Ted Bundy, who was very charming, very skillful, but had a girlfriend. How is that possible? And yet he murdered several women in one night. How is it possible to do that? We actually think there's something off literally in the neurons in the brains of these people where they lack the capacity for remorse. So the truly dangerous people in life is not the people that lack empathy, but lack remorse. This is a very scary people in life. The ones that have empathy, that can read other people, they understand emotions, but they lack remorse. And we actually think a guy by the name of Hare in Canada has studied sociopaths and psychopaths' behavior, and they actually think that there is probably a lesion somewhere in the emotional part of their brain that prevents them from feeling remorse. So those are scary people. Those are scary people.
Mark,
Yes.
the CIA studies both of these groups, but particularly the psychopaths, principally because they can do so much harm exactly, even though they don't have the remorse, they absolutely read other people's minds better than the average person. And that's how they can be so manipulative and cause so much harm.
Yes, yes, that's scary. Now that's a very, very small percentage of the population. So let me make three distinctions for you before you run off and diagnose your favorite politician. This is what we call the dark triad in psychology. It's the difference between narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy or psychopaths. I want to make this distinction briefly. Narcissism is grandiosity, pride, self-centeredness, and we typically think of them as lacking empathy. It's really more that they just don't care. But grandiosity, pride, self-centeredness, we all know narcissistic people, and it's pretty popular. Machiavellianism is narcissism on steroids. These people are manipulative, they exploit other people, there's an absence of morality, they're callous, and they're almost completely self-interested. So these people are more damaging because of the manipulative and exploitation of other people. You can be grandiose and narcissistic, but not really that focused on exploiting others. And there's an absence of morality with Machiavellianism that's not necessarily true of narcissism. I can be very self-centered, but still have areas of morality and values that I adhere to. And then the worst case is psychopaths. Psychopaths, continuous antisocial behavior, they're impulsive, they're callous, lack of emotional depth. If you meet them, there's a scary quality. You just feel eerie around them because there's an inability for them to be vulnerable at all. And there's a complete lack of remorse. A psychopath will kill you and not feel any guilt. That's a small percentage of the population, but those are the really, really, really scary people. I have met them. I've been in maximum security prisons, and you feel it. You can cut it with a knife. You feel there's something eerie. It feels spiritually evil when you're in the presence of someone like that. So it's important to make those distinctions because I think we lump them all together, and I think that it's important not to do that. Just because someone's narcissistic doesn't mean they're a psychopath. So just know that that's an important distinction.
Can I also go back to something from going back to the morality? Is it possible to, I mean, for two people to they both consider themselves moral, they both are moral people, but they have opposite views or differing views because they prioritize different things.
Yes,
so
that's my point.
Right. So we're all moral people, and we all prioritize different things, or we've had different life experiences that make us say, this is more important to me, or this is more important.
Yes.
And so it's a little presumptuous to say, well, I'm the moral one and you're immoral. We're both
Correct.
moral. We just have different priorities.
Correct. When it comes to the political divide in our country today, which is so severe, that explains it. Now, I have to also say there are immoral people. There are psychopaths. They're immoral. So they will kill you without any conscience. And they violate everybody's moral norms. So they do exist. But for the general population, you are right. I would hope we would stop doing that. You don't share my moral values, therefore you're immoral. That's what psychologists are saying, is that's not a very nuanced or accurate perspective to take. They hold different moral priorities, like loyalty and authority. I have the do no harm. Mine is, my central moral principle would be, I want to care for people and do no harm. That defines my morality. And I'm going to run into people and say, well, that's one of six. I also have these other areas that I believe are just as important as that. So that's why I believe in capital punishment, because I have all these 5 other areas that are just as moral as do no harm. And I believe that we can kill someone when they violate all these other areas. Whereas for us, we're horrified. Like, what justifies you in taking a human life? You know, well, that's the basis of that conversation. And we have to take a step back to understand that. And again, you can never out-argue someone out of their moral position. It doesn't work. What you can do is say, tell me more about that. I'm really interested in understanding. I could be wrong. Tell me more about what you guys believe. There's a guy by the name of Peter Rollins who has a church, and they have their witnessing team where they send out to the community to witness to other people. And the way they witness to other people is they say, you know, I'm not so sure I believe in Christianity anymore. Tell me what you believe. You know, I'm having a crisis here of faith, and I'm not sure if I'm right. What do you believe? Tell me about Buddhism. You know, that's the way they witness to the community, is by saying to them, I'm a seeker and I want to understand. And if you're all honest, there are times when you're not sure you're right, right? There are times when you go, do I believe this? I don't know. That's the stance that opens people up and gets them to want to listen to you when you want to listen to them. We got 3 minutes. What other questions do you want to ask?
Mark, I have a public service announcement.
All right, Jim.
On the 20th of February, the Help Group, which is a wonderful organization and that deals with handicapped kids of special needs, is having Simon Baron-Cohen. It's a free talk that deals not so much with the morality issue, but these issues of empathy and shared attention that's so important, and being seen. So anybody that's interested, they can Google the Help Group. It's the 20th of February. It's going to be, he's one of the leaders in the field.
He is, and that's the brother of Sasha, right?
Yes, which is a strange paradox.
Strange paradox, but Simon actually is a brilliant researcher and one of the leading thinkers in this whole area. So thanks for that, Jim. I mean, don't discredit him because his brother is an actor in a ridiculous comic.
I actually think I admire him more.
Okay, good. Good. He is actually a brilliant researcher, and you would do well by going to hear that talk.
Mark, I have a quick
Yes.
observation. So for us to enter a conversation with curiosity and be with empathy, I think for me, I have to first question my own stance, and my first emotion is to protect it. It's to resist. It's to stand for what, it's the label I have chosen to live by.
Yeah.
And that's a very big component for me as I'm trying to open up more. And I'm doing much better in like, okay, what is this about me that is so stuck on this particular moral or issue or whatever? And then that kind of, I can feel my body opening up and relaxing more to see, oh, wow, I look at, like, detach a little bit so I can actually see what's going on with me. And then be able to sit with someone and have more empathy and be more open to, well, what else? What am I missing here? There's something missing, because this resistance is very painful. It can't be right. It can't be Christ-like, right? So.
Exactly. To be curious, as Jody's saying, requires us to take a look at ourselves first. Why are you so concerned about the speck of dust in someone else's eye when you have a log in your own. Brilliant, brilliant psychological statement. You've got to be able to say, wait a minute, there's something impeding my vision. There has to be. I'm a human being. I make immediate, intuitive judgments about things. I think the ball costs 10 cents when it's actually only 5 cents. And I can be very, very wrong about areas of morality. That's a sobering thought. So I've got to look at the plank in my own eye before I take the speck of dust out of somebody else's eye. You're exactly right. If we could do that, we would change the planet. Well, I guess Jesus said that, and he did. So
I think everyone's making a good argument for small groups like mustard seed groups.
Yeah.
This is where the work gets done, where you come up against people that have different points of view and in an environment of trust.
yes, has to be safe, right? You have to be emotionally vulnerable and safe. If you have those two things, then we can do this growth process thing. And the small groups have always been very, very powerful places. All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much. It's always great for me. I always learn a lot when I come to BPC. So enjoy the game today.